But then somewhere along the way, later on in life, I told myself I wouldn't travel ever unless it was for business.
Mm.
And that meant that I had to find a way to really develop business. Step one, I read a buttload of books on how to be perceived as valuable. That was the main thing. So it was really more about how to bring people to me, but it turned out to be a study on how to actually be valuable to others. And that was, I read The Tipping Point. I read From Good to Great, Jeffrey Gitomore's Little Black Book of Connection and Red Book of Sales. Several books. I think I read like maybe 15, 20 books, 48 Laws of Power. And I have a systematic brain. So whenever I read, I don't read, in general, I start to put together this systematic process. Probably The Tipping Point was the most significant of all of that. This idea of virality and how to create a virus, make yourself into a virus, right?
Hmm.
And then how to spread. That started out with the idea of, and Jeffrey Gitomer says in his Black Book Connection, he says, look, you don't have any real connections unless you can call someone at 3 o'clock in the morning, ask them for something. They are neither mad at you and they will do it.
Mm.
He said, that's when you know you're connected to somebody. So, in order to be connected to that person that way, you have to find value. You have to understand that thing that's missing that you specifically can fill. If you look at the book, The Tipping Point, it talks about the maven and the connector and the salesperson. And I always thought the best person to be is a maven. You have these great ideas, you have a great skill. Well, then you have to search out the connectors. Who can connect you into the groups? Who's jumping from your group to other groups to other groups? And then who is it in that group that that person can introduce you to that will hammer your ideas down one place after the other, after the other, after the other. And you see this, right? So you see like when Kennedy started Job Corps, he was taken around from school to school to school, introduced to the heads of those different student unions, and he connected with them, and they hammered the ideas down, hammered the ideas down, hammered the ideas down. And you'll see it again. Politicians do this. Barack Obama did this in Chicago, where he went to Senator White. Senator White took him around. He was the maven, he was a connector, and then that local person he introduced him to hammered it in, hammered it into his group, hammered it into his group. So as much as that sounds like a recipe for just connecting in business, it's a recipe for international business, except for you just expand what you research. You don't just research the person, you research the entire economy. And you look at that economy and you say, okay, let's create a tier. First, let me figure out what economy is growing, has a possibility for growth. That's a couple of metrics that are out there. That's definitely they've resolved the issue of clean water and food. They've gotten to the point where there's some kind of opportunity kicking off. Someone's created a 20-year plan for development or 10-year plan for development. The pieces are there. The money and the resources are lining up. The leader is lining up. Everything that makes that thing happen. So it's an analysis you're doing to find those places that you should go into. And then you're looking for fit. Okay, out of this initiative, like I'm in IT, so I'm looking for someone to say, we have a 2030 ITC development program, ICT development program inside the country. And the World Bank is behind it, providing money. And also China is behind it, providing infrastructure support or so forth and so on. And these pieces are starting to line up, and they've got a charismatic or direct leader who's putting the hammer down, cutting out the BS and pushing the thing forward, and has created all the things that make this thing happen. So they say, okay, it's got momentum, it's got direction, it's got a plan, and it's got resources. And there's some other things you can line up and say. So one thing is, you develop your own methods of integration. Maybe they need to speak English. Maybe they need to have certain things in place. Like the thing you provide can't be provided unless something else is in place. For example, for us, we can't provide something unless there's fiber optics already laid in the ground. We need internet access. So that was from the IT standpoint. So we always look to see if those things were ready or underway or happening before we entered. Then when you get to that point, you're looking for, and this is something that I don't really talk about that much openly, but I'm going to give it to you in your program. We look for vectors of influence. So you're looking across it, and this you do this before you ever leave anywhere, before you ever
Hmm.
decide to set out on something. People run to all these different little events and they shake hands with presidents, and then they're happy about that. That's not how you do it. You're looking for vectors of influence. You want to understand who controls the power, which means just actual like raw cold political power. Then you want to see raw cold financial power, hardcore infrastructure power, hardcore religious power, hardcore criminal power, hardcore everything. And you want to look at those individuals and then analyze how they're tied together, break it down. And you deploy that through several different means. You find out, do your research online, you do open source information you grab, you call people up, whatever. Once you start looking at this spider web, look at who's connected to who, look at the overlap, and then look at how you penetrate through that overlap. This is the real sauce. I'm telling you the real way to do it, like not the BS way, the real way. You look at the real sauce. So if you find a guy, let's say you are selling IT services, you find that there is a 2030 plan towards implementing IT for all throughout all the universities and schools inside the country. You're going to need to look at the academic sector. You're going to need to look at the political sector. You're going to need to look at the business sector, the financial sector, and you're going to need to look at everybody who's putting money in from an external donor or lending sector. Once you figure those people out and who those are and what that mix is, you say, who can I touch? Well, maybe